Thank you so much for staying with us. Still on strengthening Nigeria's democratic process and a number of other issues as have been raised this morning. We have with us Eze Onyekwere, who is a lawyer and lead director, Center for Social Justice. He joins us, as you can see, from our Abuja studio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
Well, you've been listening to us for quite a bit, having all of that conversation. Today is Democracy Day, and 30 years down the line. Again, I'll ask you this question. Where were you on June 12, 1993?
Well, let me start by saying that I've been in Nigeria, and of course we voted, and there was this hope of a new renewal. And of course, Nigerians were already tired of military dictatorship, and the whole idea was that we need to start afresh. And there was this man who brought that hope, and of course, he won majority of the vote. So I've been in Nigeria, and of course, we voted.
Well, going by that word hope, there are those who would say hope is not a strategy. But if it's the only thing you have, then it's the only thing you have. So here we are, another government this time, came on the campaign of hope. And there are those, as we have asked here, raised the issues, who would say it's a very, very expensive commodity now, the hope, particularly when our trust bank account is greatly depleted. What would you say to the average Nigerian right now about hope in the face of greatly depleted trust deficiency?
Well, there is no other option than to keep hoping, because once you lose hope, once you lose that iota of thing that keeps everybody looking to the future, is as much as saying the society is withering and that there is nothing more to look out for. Not hope that you are looking at one person or the other, whether it's a president or another person, but in the fact that as a human society, as a human being, as a community, we must look with hope to the future. We must continue to strive to improve the performances of yesterday and to hold and demand accountability from the leadership. Yes, since 1999, there was so much hope, there was so much euphoria, but more or less it's evaporated because our lives have not improved. Even the ordinary voting process, which you have improved over the years, is still very, very contentious. That's why you still have all kinds of petitions before election petition tribunals. But as a human being, as a human society, we do not have any option but to strive to improve from the performances of yesterday. And that striving to improve is encapsulated in the word hope.
The president spoke to, I think, those cases in some sense, saying that if you're not able to bear the pain of defeat, then you sort of don't deserve the joy of victory. I'm sort of paraphrasing, but we'll come to that. It just hit me that he made reference to that. But still on this, topic of hope, I wonder for you, listening to the president's first nationwide broadcast. Yes, he gave that inauguration speech, but this is his first nationwide broadcast on such a day as this. Did that hope come across to you as, okay, it's a thing that we can hold on to, at least from the words of this man?
Not really, because this is not the first presidential speech we have listened to. From the days of Obasanjo down to Yar'Adua, to Jonathan, to Muhammadu Buhari, and to the present. What Nigerians need is positive action. Action that you can see and interpret is geared towards improving livelihoods, improving the rule of law, improving democracy to make sure it is one man, one woman, one vote. And of course, referring back to the issue of if you can't take the pain of defeat, of course you cannot be expected to be celebrating victory maybe in due course. The challenge that Nigerians have with issues around defeat and victory, if it is very clear and straightforward, like in a football match, somebody dribbles the whole field and scores, all you see is applause, thunderous applause. You see the genuines. But If you dribble the first person, dribble the third one, ball goes up, and you raise your hand and touch the ball, and referee pretends like nothing happened, and half of the field is saying, oh, we thought it's a handball. The other said, oh, it's about being a genius. At the end of the day, when you score, opinion will be divided. So we want to see our democracy deepened in such a way and manner that when people lose elections, it will be clear to all that this is what has happened. And you can ask yourself, why is it that over the years, even though we claim we are deepening our democracy, after every election, there are more petitions going to the election petition tribunals than in the last case? So this question of hope, we need to see concrete action. We need to see steps. We need to see new laws, new policies that should give us the hope that we are beginning afresh.
Right. I think also when you use that analogy of football, the judiciary or the election petitions court will be the VAR that gives us an opportunity to seek redress and correct whatever it is that may have gone wrong. So, yes, it's also important to add that one to it, going by the football analogy. But I'd like you to also speak to some of the points he raised in that speech, about 16, 17 minutes long. He asked Nigerians not just for sacrifice, but we must rededicate ourselves to hope. And this is Nigerian, so I imagine it talks about the governed and the government as well. What do you expect us to be doing as government and the people if we must rededicate ourselves to this hope, which looks like everybody accepts is something we can hold on to?
I recall as a young man in the university listening to Ibrahim Babangida, when he made a speech that said for today or for the future, we are being called upon to sacrifice our today of the 1980s. So there is nothing new. The expectation is that instead of, for instance, the fuel subsidy removal, the common people feel the blunt the more. I would have expected in a speech like this, where the government, the executive, the legislature, and all those in the corridors of power will have announced through the leadership of the president the sacrifices they want to make, how they want to cut down on the cost of governance, how they want to cut down on what they are taking, so that you lead from the front, you lead by the power of your example. Because like I said, I've had so many presidents call on us to tighten our belt. As we are tightening our belt, they are loosening there so that they can accommodate more of the fullness of the land, of the milk and honey, of the good things, why people are being called upon to make sacrifice. So the first way to inspire hope, to convince us that there is really hope around the corner, is by the action of leading from the front. And not leading is not about platitudes, because the days are gone when we will be repeating the same stories that Babangida says, the same stories Abacha stayed, the same stories that Abdul Salam Obasanjo, and we are now praising it as if to say there is any magical thing in the world, there is anything inspirational. We need action, and action should start by, let us see who your ministers will be. Let us see who your special advisors and what agenda they are unfolding. And by then, we can now begin to trust to say, some new hope is in the air and something good is about happening or has even started happening.
Indeed, Mr. Onyekwere, many would say that that is critical, and to deepen our democracy, it's also important to look at the conversation about the rule of law. And if you look at the president's speech, he said, he described the symbol of democracy, MK Abiola, saying that for him, democracy is eternal. But he also said something. He said it is about rule of law and vibrant judiciary that can be trusted. So if democracy is about compliance with the rule of law, can we begin to scrutinize the first few actions of this administration, particularly in the sack of, the suspension rather, of the CBN governor, and view it in terms of the rule of law? How much of compliance has been done in that regard? And just to give you a lead, some would say it's a popular decision because of the role of the CBN governor in the Naira redesign policy of the former administration. But then again, what's the altruism in that move, considering the fact that that policy was set up and targeted on the president, who was the APC candidate at the time?
Well, when we begin to talk about the rule of law, it's not about the rule of a man who feels A or B might have hurt him. The CBN Act is clear in Section 11. It talks about the removal process of a CBN governor. A prayer supported by 2/3 majority of the Senate to the president asking that the CBN governor be removed. I cannot recall if there has been any such resolution or prayer. So if we use that as a gauge for the rule of law, the action of the president in the last 2 weeks, then I'm sure that that will not pass muster in terms of it's not in accordance with the rule of law. Whether you call it suspension, whether you call it removal, he has been removed from office, and the procedure set out in the enabling law has not been followed. But let me also correct one impression here. I am not a fan of Emefiele, and throughout that period, I even came here and on several write-ups in the print media. It was my view that what was done was wrong, because the CBN simply went beyond the remit of monetary policy in doing what it did, as well as the fact that Mr. Emefiele, who was supposed to be not to be partisan, went out of his way to buy the card and become a member of the ruling party to qualify him to even dream of going to contest for presidency. So what he did was wrong, and I'm saying if he has to be removed from office, it has to be in accordance with due process of law and legal stipulations. So it is not about what the president says about the rule of law that I will use to judge his performance. It is more about what he does, because it is easy to give a speech, it's easy to read out platitudes, but your concrete action shows where you stand in matters of the rule of law. And also, somebody had talked about judges being the VAR when I made the analogy of football. Now, this is where the problem starts, and there's no need for anybody to pretend and be beaten about the bush. The judges who are supposed to be the VAR, who are supposed to be the ultimate referee, have got the jurisprudence wrong. The jurisprudence of elections in terms of who actually won the election is what should the judges do? What is their province? What are they looking for? It should be an inquiry to establish the candidate that actually got the mandate of the voters. Since democracy is about the votes. But over the years, what we have seen is that the judiciary has replaced that inquiry with all kinds of technicalities, all kinds of evidential rules that are not directed at answering the question of who got the mandate, the overwhelming mandate of the people in accordance with the Constitution. Just like what happened in Yobe, the Lawan case, all you see are all manners of booby traps and subterfuge, which is no longer addressed at that ultimate question of ensuring that the votes count. So at the end of the day, what you see the judges have been doing is a rule of technicalities. They set exams for themselves, ignoring the fundamental question that was placed before them, and then give whatever they give as decision. And of course, whoever wins will say, oh, the rule of law, Daniel is come to judgment. Whoever loses simply licks his wounds and goes, because once the Supreme Court says it, that's final. There is no other thing you can say. You can go and lick your wounds and write all kinds of literature, but that's the law.
It is the expectation that, the substance of the cases in this time, in this era, will trump technicalities. But, going back, to the conversation on the rule of law, I wonder if, because the argument also goes in favor of the president, that in past administrations, specifically under former President Goodluck Jonathan, there was also similar move, which was interpreted by the court, but unchallenged, to the extent that it was said that there was a right, to suspend the former CBN governor, since it was not particularly a sack. That on the one hand. Now, is this, because they say the morning shows the day, is this, does this speak of what is to come for this administration in terms of compliance with the rule of law?
Now, the fact that a court says you have the right to suspend, when in actual fact what you did is a sack. You see, I'm not going to enter into the sheer legalism and technicalism of people who want you to cut a pound of flesh without shedding one drop of blood, when you know that there is no way you can pick up the flesh without the blood. The point is that the law is clear. This is a process to remove a serving CBN governor. Whatever you go through the back door and say it is suspension, when you had no intention ab initio to bring him back. I'm not saying a CBN governor who commits an offense should not be investigated and prosecuted, but I'm talking of what the law is clear on. So whoever sits somewhere, whether he's a judge of the High Court or Supreme Court, and decides to interpret clear provisions the other way around, I'm not particularly bothered. And this is where Nigerians had to stand firm. The judge is simply a public officer, paid at my tax expense, at your tax expense. We should insist that he also interprets the law the right way. I did not write the CBN Act Section 11. It is clear, written in black and white. Anybody who is educated enough can interpret it. He doesn't need to take a judge. But if you think that simply because you are a judge and you now turn clear things the other way and you expect me to clap for you, it's the same law school you went to that all of us went to, and the words are very, very clear. So what I'm saying is that the rule of law is not about the rule of man. It's not about our whims and caprices. It's not about our prejudices. And I'm saying there is a procedure. I didn't say don't remove him. There is a procedure. The fact that Jonathan did it, if what Jonathan did is wrong, even if you bring 100 presidents to repeat it, what Jonathan did cannot in any way be a justification for violating what's written in English language, okay, that everybody can read. So let's just get these things clear, and let's not start the obfuscation of somebody interpreting things upside down. The law is clear, black and white.
Well, you also, I recall you commended the condemned, that's the word, the amendment of the CBN Act by the 9th Assembly just a few days before President Buhari left office. And I know you've been quite vocal about some of these processes, but I'd like you to speak to a point. The president in his speech incidentally talked about the rule of law just after he said democracy is eternal. He talked about the rule of law and said that he wants to uphold the rule of law, have a vibrant judiciary. And he talked about the harmonization which he recently signed into law as a testament to that. A lot of people have imputed, different reasons and all of that. But I wonder, in the whole scheme of this rule of law, which you want to be entrenched, since we say we're practicing democracy, how do you view that?
Well, if judges are to retire by 70, and that's the wisdom of the legislature, I have no objection. But the challenge I also see is that I need to call a spade a spade. Most Nigerians, whether they are judges or political office holders, usually try to reduce their age, okay? Somebody can be 70 and in the books is only acknowledging 60 or 65. I hope we are not going to get to the situation where you have somebody in his 80s, simply because he has doctored the books, still sitting in the judiciary, okay, by virtue of this new amendment. I have no objection to people who are healthy, who have the requisite intellect, still sitting and delivering judgment, but it will be a disaster if people alter their ages and as 80, 80-something or 75, they are still sitting there. So if everybody can say the truth about the actual time he or she was born and abide by that truth, then it is good. But if we are still in a scenario where people can doctor their ages simply because they want to stay more on the bench or in any office, then this is not good enough.
Well, Mr. Onyekwere, there are those who would raise questions about the process of our democracy so far. Our previous guest spoke about the need for us to recognize that Democracy is not a 100-meter dash. It's a marathon, and it's an adventure of sorts. We have to keep working at it, have to keep going at it. And one of the clear dictums of democracy is separation of powers, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary. It would seem like this is the first time in our history where we are having the president, a former senator, the vice president, a former senator, first lady, former senator, well, just exited from the Senate, and a whole load of people may also be joining the cabinet as people from the legislature as well. For you, how significant is that in a drive or a quest for a more perfect democracy?
Well, there are two sides of this coin. If all these people have imbibed the positive virtues and qualities of a democracy in terms of having had legislative experience, and even the president having had the executive powers as a governor of a state, and you know what the legislature is all about, what their role is, and you are going to respect it, it's going to be a plus in terms of separation of powers and understanding that every arm of government has its duties under the Constitution. But the other side of it is that having been in the Senate or having been in the legislature, having been in the executive, having managed these affairs before, could also bring some negative spin in terms of you've understood all the issues, all the weak points in the legislature, and you may now decide to use it against the legislature in the relationship between the executive and the legislature. But ordinarily, it is a very good development. And what Nigerians want to see is an independent legislature, not a rubber stamp legislature. For instance, we are complaining today about things like the ways and means that accumulated up to 23 trillion before it was submitted for legislative approval after the fact that it's been spent. If we had a robust legislature, the outgoing legislature, if they were robust, if they were doing their duties very well, if they didn't consider themselves rubber stamp, there's no way 1 trillion, 2 trillion, 5 trillion, 10, 20, without their oversight powers and functions, exposing it, and even calling it short. Maybe they could have discovered this at 5 trillion and simply stopped it there. And in retrospect, what I did say about increasing the ways and means allowance from 5 to 15, look at every budget. Right. Ways and means is not a means of funding the deficit. It's a temporary advance. That's what the law says. And we had a crisis with only 5% authorization in the Act. Now, we are not even able to keep to that. We are not even able to repay at the due time. So you can imagine when you can have that leeway of 15%, it's more or less that the legislature is now looking at ways and means as a means of funding the budget. Go back and see the budgets of Nigeria from independence till date. I've never come across anywhere where ways and means is written into the budget as a source of funding the deficit.
Two issues I'd like to raise with you, one in relation to this and another point that you made earlier. But let me follow up with what a lot of Nigerians expect to happen tomorrow. That's the inauguration of the 10th Assembly. And, you know, with this talk about interference and all, I wonder what you make of it. And because the APC, the president, they've not hidden their choice for who they want to lead the National Assembly, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. We've seen some people falling into line, particularly at the House of Reps. Well, for the Senate, it looks like it's going to be up until the last minute. How do you expect this process to go? Yes, we can talk about what preceded it, but we have just a day to go. Do you expect voting to be open? Should it be secret? How do you expect the lawmakers to carry the trust, the responsibility which Nigerians have placed in them, sending them into those hallowed chambers?
I expect them to vote according to their conscience. It should be by secret ballot in accordance with the trust that Nigerians have bestowed on them. And there is a challenge that we've been running away from. Look at even the person who is being recommended as to lead the Senate, with all the baggage that the EFCC is still going after the person. And then you have the ruling party making that recommendation and saying this is our candidate. And what does that portend back to the question of the rule of law? Once you become the Senate president, yes, you don't have immunity, but if you are the choice of the party, I don't see the EFCC or the anti-corruption agency still going after that case. And that sends a very, very dangerous signal to our democracy, to the rule of law, to the fact that punishment must follow a crime. So we can't continue like this. The senators, the distinguished reps, should understand that history beckons, that at the end of the day, Nigerians will look at each and every one of them and decide to hold them accountable and write their names either in the good part of history or in the bad part of it. Nobody should be coerced. Nobody should be intimidated, because at the end of the day, every man, every woman has got a right to decide his own destiny. Even from the religious angle, when the time you leave this world, when you go and meet your creator, if you believe in God, whether you believe in him or not, you are not going to plead. You are not going to be hard to say, A or B told me to do wrong. When you've already been given a conscience of your own, when you already have the Spirit of God to make a decision and for which you will be accountable. So nobody, I repeat, nobody should plead that another told him to put his hand in fire as the reason for trying to put his own hand in fire or plunging the hands of Nigerians into fire. It is no defense.
You know, Mr. Onyekwere, some members-elect themselves would argue that, you know, there's nothing out of place that the party has done, that, you know, in line with international parliamentary practice, in line with best practice globally, that the party nominates, you know, their choice of candidates into key positions of parliament, and that in fact, you know, those who are positioning themselves, you know, with aspirations countering the party's position are doing so just for self-interest. So what really do you think, you know, about this sides of the coin, sides of the argument, which should trump the other, you know, the independence of parliament, or really what parliamentarians themselves argue should be, you know, the best practice, that is, that the party nominates going from the strength of having won the elections?
I am minded to say that the political party should have a say, but not an overwhelming say. And what it means is that if you have 50 members or 60 elected from your party and you are in the majority, you should look at the background, antecedents of each of those members that are representing your party. And from their background and from what they've done in the past, because many of them have held public office, then you select the cream de la cream, the best of the best, in the national interest. You cannot always be bringing out your third 11 in a football match that you are going to play against the Ronaldos and the Messis in their prime, and you bring out a third 11. That means you are preparing, you've already made up your mind that you are going to collect goals, that you may lose by as much as 7-8-0. So in essence, the legislature should be independent. The political party should also have a role, but they need to come together by consensus and find the best in the national interest, which is beyond both the political party and the legislature. We are discussing the interest of Nigeria. We are discussing the persons who can make the best laws, who can exercise oversight. You remember, the relationship between the executive and the legislature is some form of romance. Yes, there's love, there's hate, right. You know. It's just like there's always this constitutionally provided not always being on the same page, because if they start operating on the same page, it's like a conspiracy against the people. So yes, there'll be love, there'll be hate. One person must try to call the other best party to order. And that's why I'm saying political party will play a role, the legislators will then play a role, but every role must be in the bigger picture of the national interest.
Well, Mr. Onyekwere, I'm reading a story now, a headline that says APC senators reject suspension of CBN governor and accuses president of applying double standards. But when you look closely at the date, you realize This was in February 2014. APC senators at that time were condemning the suspension of then CBN governor. If you recall that story very well, the former emir now. And I see the statement signed by Senator Babafemi Ojudu, of course, a member of the party. And you say that this hasn't been done right. A lot of people have said that. So who should be speaking or taking action if, according, by the way, that statement quotes Section 11, sub 12 of the CBN Act, essentially the same thing a lot of people have said. So who should be taking this up?
Well, that is the duty of the legislature. I mean, the outgone legislature should have done something. Even the new one that is going to be inaugurated should also try to call the president to order. You see, that's what I was saying. The concept of the rule of law, the concept of democracy is as constant as the Northern Star. The rules don't change because the man from your constituency or who you favor or who you are his loyalist has come to power. If what Jonathan did in 2014 was wrong, what Tinubu is doing today is also wrong. But if he has committed any offense, please do investigate him. Bring him to trial before a court of competent jurisdiction. Apply the rules of the criminal law and evidence. If he's convicted, so be it. But if you cannot sustain a charge, these ideas of media trial, accusations and counter-accusations, I also expect that the DSS should, if there is anything bordering on economic crime, hand him over to either the EFCC or the ICPC or the police. So the law has not changed. It still remains what it is. So whether it was APC then condemning or PDP today saying something, nothing has changed. Nigerians still demand that the rule of law should be followed. That's simple.
Well, we have to thank you very much, Mr. Onyekwere, for being on this program today. I mean, several other questions trail that comment that he just made, that if he is to be investigated while in office, is that even according to the law? But, we'll take that on some other time. We have to thank you very much at this time. Eze Onyekwere is a lawyer and lead director, Center for Social Justice. Thank you so much for your time and your perspectives today.
Thank you.
All right. So we're back right after now to take on that issue of the 10th National Assembly. Right back after now.